This is True News, your alternative source for global news, analysis, and commentary. I'm Rick Wiles. The Washington Post recently published an article titled "The Terrifying Rise of Diabetes in Every Corner of the U.S." The article said diabetes has reached epidemic proportions in America due to sugary diets and lack of exercise. If current disease rates continue, 1 in 3 Americans will have diabetes by the year 2050. Over time, the condition can lead to kidney failure, limb amputations, and blindness, said the Washington Post. Dr. Richard Jacoby is a nerve surgeon in Scottsdale, Arizona. He is co-founder of the Scottsdale Healthcare Wound Management Center. Dr. Jacoby warns that a diet full of sugar and carbohydrates can be linked to severe life-threatening diseases, including heart disease, MS, and cancer. He recently published a book titled Sugar Crush: How to Reduce Inflammation, Reverse Nerve Damage, and Reclaim Good Health. He's on the phone right now from Scottsdale. Dr. Jacoby, welcome to True News.
Well, thank you for having me.
This rise of diabetes is alarming because we're now seeing children being diagnosed with diabetes. How bad is this, sir?
It's out of control. As you stated, it's a pandemic. There's 350 million people worldwide now that are diagnosed with diabetes, and I suspect there's twice that number with the pre-diabetic problem that we have, and specifically in the younger age group, because they're the ones that are consuming massive amounts of sugary drinks, Coca-Cola, etc. But their diets are not only in the drinks they're drinking, it's the food they're eating. It's laced with high fructose corn syrup, and that is really the culprit.
And the corn syrup is in practically every processed product that we buy at the grocery stores.
80% of the food in the grocery stores has high fructose corn syrup in it. Now, the particularly damage effect of high fructose corn syrup is it tastes great. That's the problem. It's addicting. And once you get addicted to it, you constantly have to eat it. And that's why we have the obesity epidemic. Now, not all overweight people have diabetes, but it's probably about an 80% correlation. Those people who have not been diagnosed with diabetes have prediabetes or insulin resistance. The more sugar you eat, the more insulin you need, and the higher your insulin levels, it leads to a host of different diseases. In my book, I outline the peripheral neuropathy that I think most people understand, the diabetic neuropathy that it's causing the lower extremity and leads to amputation. But all these diseases are interrelated. Alzheimer's, autism, in my opinion, MS, they are all the same disease. The end organ is being damaged by cutting off the blood supply to the nerve.
Is this why, as a podiatrist, you become so concerned about diabetes?
Yes, because when I started the Scottsdale Healthcare's Wound Center about 25 years ago with other physicians from different specialties, we kind of thought that that was a separate disease. It affected the feet. Now, we knew that the eye problems were related and the kidney problems were related. But really, it's every disease, including the most popular disease that we've been talking about lately, and that's ALS. Last year, there was that phenomenon of pouring ice water over your head to bring attention to this disease. The National Football League gave money in their settlement, in the concussion settlement, to ALS because the National Football League has a 40% higher incidence of ALS. And that's the 9th cranial nerve in the neck. When you're eating massive amounts of carbohydrates, and NFL players do, it's the only way you can get up to over 300 pounds, you have to eat sugar, you have to eat carbohydrates. That inflames the nerves. And when you traumatize the nerve, in this particular case, the nerve in the neck, then it causes ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and you lose the ability to swallow, and you die. It takes about 2.5 years to do that. So this is a very pervasive, insidious disease. It affects every end organ system in the body.
To me, this is new. When did this appear?
The ALS?
Yes, sir.
Just recently, last year, it wasn't publicized because they were talking about the concussion, which is the inflammation of the brain. But in that settlement, ALS was a gift to the ALS Foundation, is about $40 million. So they must recognize that this is part of the problem, because there's a 40% higher incidence in the NFL players over the general population. In my book, I outlined sugar plus trauma equals nerve compression. This theory that I'm expounding and extrapolating and applying to all the nerves was really first looked at in 1973 by two investigators, Upton and McComas. And then at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Lee Dellon further enunciated the problem with sugar and nerve compression. I studied with him about 15 years ago, and I offered him this theory. At first, he was very skeptical, but he did write the foreword to my book. John Cook out of Stanford, a vascular biologist, who is also studying this phenomena, we're all kind of coming to the conclusion sugar, and specifically high fructose corn syrup, is the cause of this massive pandemic.
Let's also talk about carbohydrates. What's the link to disease?
Carbohydrates break down to a monosugar, monosaccharide. In other words, with a carbohydrate in its complex form, let's take the bark of a tree. That's a complex carbohydrate. We don't eat the bark of a tree. We eat processed carbohydrates. As soon as it hits your lips, it breaks down to sugar. That's why it tastes so good. It instantly goes into the bloodstream, produces an insulin effect. Insulin is the only hormone that can put weight on you. Eating fat does not make you fat. Eating carbohydrates makes you fat. Just today, Chipotle banned GMOs, genetically modified organisms, which is the basis for the carbohydrate explosion in the United States. And I link that process to autism. Now, that's a little bit more complicated connection, but that is the 12th cranial nerve, in my opinion, that is being compressed. Preconception, I believe. That's why we have a tremendous increase in the prevalence of autism in the United States. Other countries ban GMOs. Chipotle today is now not going to use that. It's going to cause a revolution in the agribusiness. People don't want to have GMOs in their diet, but they've been unable to force the companies to stop making it. Maybe this is a start.
You know, and actually, I was under the impression that Chipotle was GMO-free, but what they're saying is that a lot of the ingredients that they use, could be a starch or something in, a flavoring has GMO attributes to it. So it's almost impossible to get away from it now if you live in the United States.
That's correct. That's why we have the highest incidence of diseases. Now, when we export our grains around the world, then that disease goes with it. When I first started looking at this in 1981, I was asked by the Surgeon General of Taiwan to investigate their alarming incidence of diabetes. When I got there, I couldn't really find anybody. They had very, very few people. But what they did have was fast food restaurants just arriving in 1979. And you could see the kids, the affluent kids, the ones who had money, they were going in and out of these fast food restaurants. They were fat. The average person in Taiwan then was very, very skinny. It's diet. And it's always been diet. And it's never been fat. The fat hypothesis is an absolute lie. Eating fat does not make you fat. Eating sugar does.
The genetically modified organisms in America, practically all corn, wheat, soy is now GMO. Is that correct?
Corn for sure, soy for sure. The wheat, not necessarily. They have hybridized the wheat product. And what I mean by that, they've genetically changed it over time. But wheat is not necessarily using GMO products. Glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in the Monsanto product that is sprayed on the corn crop, I think that's where the problem is. Glyphosate is the active ingredient, and it gets into our system. It was when it was originally tested on humans, it had no effect. But what it does affect is the gut bacteria, and that's called the shikimate pathway. When I ask investigators if they ever heard of that pathway, most of them never heard of the biochemistry of the gut bacteria. But that is the problem. It gets into our system, it's a poison, and all these seemingly different diseases are really all one and the same.
I've interviewed previous guests talking about Monsanto's glyphosate, and do you think that there's a link to autism?
I do. And the shikimate pathway, there's an investigator, Stephanie Seneff, at MIT.
Yes. That's who I interviewed, yes.
Well, she has collaborated with me in the book I just wrote, Sugar Crush. I've taken her theory of the shikimate pathway and the glyphosate and found evidence that was printed back in 2000 in Scientific America. There is a difference in the brainstem of kids with autism. There's a difference in 1.1 millimeter in the brainstem, and that's where the hypoglossal nerve forms at day 22 to day 24 after conception. I think it gets compressed. That's why kids have delayed speech, and this is a genetic aberration due to a chemical change that's pre-conception, not post-conception. So the parents are eating high doses of high fructose corn syrup. Another fact that I found with the high fructose corn syrup, it's made with mercury. A third of the food supply had mercury in it when it was tested several times. The process is being phased out, but mercury is used as a catalyst in sodium hydroxide, which is lye, and that's how you separate the corn from the starch.
This is the first time I've heard this, Doctor. Mercury is in the food?
Mercury is in our food supply. And that is certainly a neurotoxin in very, very small amounts. I find it interesting. There was thousands of tons of mercury used in this process. We know about the amalgam in the teeth. We know about the vaccination. We all played with mercury as a kid. But I found mercury literature that no one seems to know about, and that's the biggest use of mercury in the United States in the food production.
That's the most astounding thing I've heard in a long time.
It was astounding to me as well. Even chickens or eating grain products, they use. I talked to an investigator a couple of weeks ago about eggs. An egg can go from an egg to a full butchered chicken in 30 days now. They give them arsenic. That's how they keep them awake 24/7. So we have mercury, arsenic, glyphosate, all types of things in our food supply, and then we wonder why America's fat and sick.
They're giving arsenic to chickens to keep them awake?
That's how they keep them awake. That's how they get them from egg to slaughter in 30 days.
Oh, this is sick. We're like living in some type of Nazi petri dish.
That's a good way to put it.
It really is. I mean, the whole system it's perverted and wicked and evil. I mean, they're doing things with our food that is outrageous.
It is outrageous. And then we counteract it with things like statin drugs to lower your cholesterol. Here's the fact that I found. The higher your cholesterol, the higher your IQ. The lower your cholesterol, the lower your IQ. Why would you take a statin drug? To get dumber and dumber? It's outrageous. Fat never was a problem. Cholesterol isn't a fat. It's a wax. It's made in your liver. You can eat all the cholesterol you want. You could eat eggs all day long. It's not going to raise your cholesterol. And even if it did, what's it got to do with heart disease? Nothing. It's sugar. Sugar causes inflammation in the lining of the blood vessels. That's why you have heart attacks and strokes, not from eating fat. Now, you can eat the wrong kind of fat, which trans fatty acids, certainly you don't want to do that. You want to stick to natural omega-3 fatty acid, which comes from grass-fed animals. Eggs, butter, anything like that is good for you. Omega-6 are coming from grain-fed. That is inflammatory, and you really want to avoid that. But eating fat is good. Eating sugar is bad. It's that simple. But why don't we know that? We've been we've been dumbed down over the last 50 years.
And I was just thinking, we've just gone through decades of the low-fat mantra, and millions of people avoiding fat, and yet eating sugar. And it's almost like somebody wanted to divert their attention. Stay focused on fat. Don't pay attention to sugar.
Right. As I say, are these scientists that stupid, or are they on the take? I know that's a provocative sentence, but they can't be that stupid. When you read the literature, it's very, very clear. It's sugar, not fat. Yet, recently, they upped the amount of people that they're trying to put on statin drugs. And it's a national disgrace.
Is there a link between sugar and cancer?
Absolutely. Otto Warburg in 1931 got the Nobel Prize in Medicine for saying just that. And he said specifically fructose, which was amazing to me back in 1931 when there was really very little fruit in our diets. Cancer cells live on sugar. That's what a PET scan is. And he's named after that, the Warburg effect. When you do a PET scan, you're really seeing the hot spots in your body that are turning over sugar at a high rate. That's where the cancer cells resolve. I use an analogy. If you had sugar on your floor in your kitchen, would you spray it with Raid every day and never remove the sugar and come back 6 months and do a PET scan to see if there is overactivity of the roaches? We're using chemotherapy to kill the roaches. Just eliminate sugar from your diet. He got the Nobel Prize, not, as I say kiddingly, not the Marvel comic book prize. He got the Nobel Prize in medicine, yet no one understands that process. Ketogenic diet, that's the next phase of what I just said. Ketogenic diet means eating a minimal amount of carbohydrates. Cancer cells can't live on ketogenic diet because ketones kill cancer cells. Cancer cells live on sugar. But what do? We give them chemotherapy and then give them Ensure. It says protein on the front, but it's really high doses of sugar to keep the patient's weight up. We're actually killing them with sugar.
Astounding. We all know the sugar is addictive. Typically, what's the time frame for someone to break a sugar addiction?
That's an excellent question. It depends on how long you've been on this sugar addiction. The longer the process, certainly the harder it is to get off of sugar. Most people fail at these diets because they're trying to gradually get off of sugar. I think you really have to do it cold turkey, no pun intended there. Myself, I would say I was not a sugar addict until I eliminated it entirely from my diet. It was extremely difficult. What I do, I put butter in my coffee, and I tell my patients to do that as well. And it's shocking when it sounds so anti-intuitive to do that.
I have just in the past week seen news articles about buttered coffee, and I was like, what is this about? I have no idea. So you're the first guest I've had who has said buttered coffee. Tell us why.
Well, first of all, you have to love coffee, and I happen to love coffee, and I love butter. And I mean good omega-3 fatty acid butter from grass-fed animals. And what it does, it cuts the need for sugar. So as soon as you bring fat into your system, there's a chemical hormone called leptin. Leptin is that hormone that makes you want to eat carbohydrates, and it just cuts that desire. So you become satiated. And there's a difference between satiation and full. That turkey dinner at Thanksgiving, you're stuffed, but you still could eat more food if you wanted to. When you eat fat, you have a sense of being very satisfied with what you just ate and have no desire for more food. What happens when you drink hot butter coffee, and I had a cup this morning before this interview, I'm perfectly awake and alert, and I will not eat for the whole day because I have no desire. Now, the problem with drinking hot butter coffee, you will lose a pound a day, no question about it. And
you'll lose a pound a day?
Pound a day until you start to put some carbohydrates back in.
Simply because it takes away the appetite?
It cuts your appetite, gives you energy, and it gives you a sense of control over your food supply. When I'm in the operating room, nurses come in from the hospital. And they always come into my room and tell me how many pounds they're losing, because what I mainly do is operate on peripheral nerves for the diabetic population, restoring sensation back to their feet so we don't have these amputations. Now, most people that we operate on are in the end phase of this. I don't want anybody to think if you have diabetic neuropathy you need surgery. The first thing you need to do is get off of sugar. And and one way to do that is put fat back in your diet. If you like coffee, put it in your coffee, tablespoon or two. You could blend it or not blend it. I happen to like the taste of the butter before the coffee. When it touches my lips, it's amazing. Some people use coconut oil, which is another good fat to use. They'll blend both or use coconut oil instead of butter. But any fat, good oil is amazing what it'll do for you.
Okay, I already know what your answer will be about artificial sweeteners, because we have pounded on this for 16 years, telling people not to use them. What about the other sweetener alternatives such as stevia, coconut sugar, agave?
Well, agave is sugar. Any sugar is bad. Doesn't matter if it's honey or brown sugar versus white sugar. They're all bad. Now, stevia is a separate case. Stevia, I think, is good if you need something sweet, but once you start putting fat back in your diet, you really don't want a sweet taste, and using stevia brings you back to the desire for sweetness. So I think in the beginning phases, stevia is fine, but after a while, you just don't want any sweet things.
You want to get your body totally deconnected from any desire for something sweet.
Yes, exactly. As a matter of fact, one of the problems when you get off of carbohydrates, now I grew up in Philadelphia, so bread was a big part of my diet. Getting off of bread or pasta, things like that, is very difficult to do, putting fat back in. But there are some good pastas. The European pastas don't have GMOs, and I was in Italy last year giving a lecture on nerve problems, and I did eat pasta there. Everybody there seems to be thin. They drink a lot of wine. They eat pasta all the time, and they're thin. Of course, a lot of them smoke, so maybe that's part of it.
Have you heard that refrigerating pasta for a day reduces? I think it reduces the starch content.
I have not heard of that.
I recently saw a study on that if you refrigerate the pasta and then reheat it, the following day, that it actually reduces the starch content in the food.
Well, there's an excellent book out there called Wheat Belly. Dr. William Davis, he's a cardiologist, and he is a pioneer in the hybridized wheat, and that is pasta. But non-GMO is in Europe. Most of the European countries do not use GMOs, and their autism rate, especially Italy, is extremely low. Ours is extremely high. When I first started looking at this, in 2000, the autism rate was 16 per 10,000 births. Last year, different numbers, but 1 in 50 to 1 in 68 births in the United States have autism or a autism spectrum disorder. Some people say, well, it's a better diagnosis. I don't think so. That's an extraordinarily high number. Other countries don't have it. They don't use GMOs. There's got to be a link. This is a big problem.
All right, so the advice to the radio audience is the number one thing to do to improve your health is to cut out all sugar.
Correct.
Simple as that.
Simple as that.
And they're going to see changes in their health
immediately.
Well, the book is Sugar Crush, How to Reduce Inflammation, Reverse Nerve Damage, and Reclaim Good Health. The author is Dr. Richard Jacoby from Scottsdale, Arizona. Doctor, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Hey, have you ever had a sugar crush? I know a lot of people have a sugar crush. I was thinking about the country song, what was the 1980s, K.T. Oslin, Come Monday morning, going on a diet, just like sugar, honey. I think all of us have dealt with a sugar crush at one time or the other. Hey, we want to say hello to new affiliates, Life FM, 1020 AM, Anderson, South Carolina, and 4 new affiliates with Freedom FM in Albany, Georgia, Twin Falls, Idaho, Lewiston, Montana, and Somerville, South Carolina.